coming back really to touch on community wealth building. I think it's a topic we're going to hear more and more about, particularly I think as people are looking at economic recovery, and we're looking at how we, I guess, build our communities and to some degree keep that focus on the localism, I guess, that's been driven a little bit in the last few months. How do we keep our communities working together? Always been a really interesting topic for the social enterprise sector, and I'm really delighted today to be joined by Neil, who's community wealth building advisor to Scottish Government, Julie from North Ayrshire Council, and Bridie and Craig representing GoBeyond Edinburgh. A group of organisations have come together to look at kind of a community wealth building approach in their area. So we're going to start our session today hearing from Neil, hand on to Julie, and then I think Craig and Bridie are doing a bit of a chat and a communication about how it's worked for them in their area. And then, as with our usual kind of outline for these events, we'll come to Q&A at the end. But if you've got anything as we're going through, do post it into the chat, and really looking forward to hearing your questions and hearing from our speakers. So without holding back on the content with my inane chat, I will hand over straight to Neil. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Naomi. And is it morning? It's good morning, everyone. And I'm Neil McInroy. I'm a part-time secondee to the Scottish Government as a community wealth building advisor. I'm also the chief exec of the Centre for Local Economic Strategies, and I'm just going to give a little bit about what community wealth is all about. I don't have any slides, so you'll just have to look at me. I don't know, that's a good thing. So I think the first thing to say about community wealth building is that it's not a new name for an old term. You know, it is community wealth building. It's not community development, it's not economic development, but you see it's a fusion between the two in a sense, right? And what it actually does is it hot wires social, economic, and ecological outcomes into our economy. Hot wires it, not as an afterthought, but hot wires it right in at the centre of it, right in the DNA of how our economy functions and who it functions for. Now, a lot of you might be familiar with the term redistribution. Yeah, so this is like you pay a tax, it comes out in public services, welfare payments, regeneration. Community wealth building is a bit about that, but it's most about pre-distribution, not redistribution, pre-distribution. That's hot wiring. We're actually interested, how do we make sure, right, that when an economy works, hot wired into how it actually works, you're getting social, economic, and ecological justice. Not wait until you get the wealth and then the wealth is then returned to us. No, how do we actually, and as the economy functions, it truly benefits us. Now, why pre-distribution is important is because wealth gets extracted, gets extracted if we wait too much. If we wait too long till it's produced and then we're going to get it back, no, it's away in the Cayman Islands by then. Yeah, it's disappeared. So we need to make sure that we as Scots have a genuine stake in the economy as it is actually functioning, as the economy produces stuff, that we are involved much more in it. And also we're thinking about the wider social and ecological outcomes as the economy actually works. Yeah. And I'll come back onto that a wee bit in a minute. Now, the community wealth building has been going 20 years. It's been going in lots of different ways, but as a term, 20 years USA, and then taken forward in the last 12 years across the UK. And it's got my interest in it, I suppose, came about from an understanding about how economic development and regeneration was working, or not working as the case may be. And I went, many years ago, I went to see a director of economic development in a Scottish place. And I said, how's it going? This was in a period of significant regeneration money, you know? Yeah, a lot of money coming to communities to help to develop them, and also a lot of money coming in to help business to come, sweeteners for business and so forth. So a lot of public money, regeneration money. And I said, how's it going? He goes, oh, it's going pretty good. We've got a new town centre, we've got a new business park opening. We've got a new road layout. It's all quite good. Yeah, well, sounds good. You're on the up. Oh, we hope so. Hope we're on the up. Aye. And then we said, you know what though? I'm a wee bit worried. I don't think it's really changing people's lives. What do you mean it's not changing? Well, the jobs are getting are low-paid jobs. Yeah, there's a lot of investment going in, but you know they're employing some local people, but the owners are. It's a global company that's come in. You know, all the shareholders are getting the dividends. You know, the wealth's not really. We're spending a lot of money, but the wealth's not really sticking. The wealth's scooshing away. So that was the start of thinking about community wealth. Well, how do we make wealth stick? How do we make wealth flow so it truly benefits people and communities? What are the dimensions of this flows? And we did lots of work around this subsequently, research work, finding out where wealth does flow to. And so if you think about wealth as almost like that behind me, you know, a flow of water or a flow of a river, where does it flow to? You know, is it flowing into the communities, or is it flowing away to somewhere, some consultant or somebody else somewhere else? Flows and where wealth lands and how it gathers are fundamental features of all economies. We need to think deeply about wealth and its flows. So a range of work across the UK being done on this, flows of wealth, time to turn the dial. I can talk about the Preston model. We were involved in that early doors. In Stellar, Wigan model, away from North Ayrshire, lots of different examples. But let's just see what's happened in Scotland. It sits as a practical means of delivering its well-being economy. There's 6 areas that are at the moment doing community wealth building. North Ayrshire have been doing it since 2018, 2019. Clacks, Fife, Western Isles, Glasgow City region, and south of Scotland. They're all doing it in a different sort of way. And there's action plans getting produced around that. And there's 5 pillars of community wealth building. Important to think, how does wealth flow? Yeah. One is public sector spending, procurement and commissioning. Who's getting the contracts? Is it social enterprises or is it global global corporation? So procurement and finance. Second one is land and property. Who owns the land and property and who's getting the wealth from it? Create community wealth building, flow of wealth. Third one's finance. We hold a lot of wealth, don't we, in Scotland? Pension funds, growth deals. Where's that money? Where's the finance going? Do we have a finance that truly nurtures and nourishes our communities and builds community wealth? The fourth area is land. The fourth area is workforce. So are there large public sector organisations? Who are they employing? Are they employing people from poor areas? Are they paying low living wage? Got good terms and conditions? It's an important source of wealth, income through job. And fifthly, and most importantly, ownership. The theory goes that if you've got lots of large global corporates, too many of them, wealth extracted. If you've got social enterprises, if you've got co-ops, if you've got a whole range of inclusive ownership models, wealth sticks. The more likely to employ local people, the more likely to have local suppliers, and if they make a buck, the more likely to reinvest that in that place and in their business. So ownership matters, and that's a big feature of community wealth building and key to social enterprise activity as well as what you're up to, I'm sure, in your own place. Right, I'll shut up from there. I hope that was useful, and I'm looking forward to the chat and the discussion from there. Naomi.
Thank you very much, Neil. I've already got questions I've been writing down as you've been speaking, and lots of thoughts, and I know we'll have people attending that have got the same. I know Julie's going to pick up a few of those themes, I think, around the pillars and what North Ayrshire is doing as, I guess, the first local authority to take on this approach in Scotland. So really looking forward to hearing from Julie. So over to you.
Thanks, Naomi. I'm just going to share some slides here, if you bear with me a moment. So my name's Julie McLachlan. I'm a Senior Manager for Economic Policy at North Ayrshire Council. And as Naomi said, we're the first council in Scotland to launch a community wealth building strategy. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview of our journey. So for us in North Ayrshire, community wealth building is very much about a new economic model that's focused on well-being and inclusion. As Neil said, seeing community wealth building as a set of practice or tools to achieve a well-being economy in Scotland. And community wealth building is very much at the heart of our plan as a council. We worked with CLES in 2019 to undertake a community wealth building diagnostic, which looked at where the council was against each of those 5 pillars that Neil mentioned and what further actions can we take to become a community wealth building council. We established a community wealth building commission, which brings together some of the key local and regional anchor institutions in the region. So anchor institutions being bodies that spend a lot, employ a lot of people, own land and assets, coming together, looking at where are the collaborative opportunities for us to retain and grow local wealth. I think it's important to note, probably in terms of anchor institutions, so it can differ in terms of the place. So for example, the most obvious examples would be local authorities, NHS, colleges. However, I do think that social enterprises, development trusts, locally owned businesses as well are also significant anchor institutions in a place, because they can influence the employment, create local jobs and direct wealth locally as well. So I very much see social enterprises, different forms of business models as being key community anchor institutions in an area. In North Ayrshire, we have 6 locality partnerships, which are made up of community planning partners and community representatives. And we've engaged across all of those in the development of our community wealth building strategy, as well as engaging staff as well, and supporting staff understand as buyers of goods, as commissioners of services, as employers, the key economic and social power that they hold within their roles. So our strategy set out 6 community wealth building objectives that aligned, you can see they're aligned to the 5 community wealth building pillars. In short, what we want to achieve is becoming a community wealth building council. So it's at the heart of everything that we do across our services. We want to increase our local spend to support a more resilient local business base. I think that's really important when we come to think about economic recovery as well. And within that, I would say support a more diverse local economy too. So encourage the creation of more social enterprises, different forms of business ownership models such as community ownership, cooperatives. We want to create jobs, but jobs that are fair, jobs that are well paid, jobs that have progression opportunities for people that focus on staff well-being. We want to maximise the land and assets that we own. As a council, given our post-industrial history and heritage, we have a lot of land and assets that we have within council ownership. We also have a significant amount of vacant and derelict land. How do we maximise those, and how do we look at different solutions to what's gone in the past with regeneration? How do we look at things like community ownership, support community asset transfer as well, and look at different models? We want to invest locally and encourage others to invest in our communities, but we also need to look at more progressive financial initiatives, such as exploring the feasibility of community banks, supporting credit unions, and looking at things like pensions. How do we direct more of that funding that's there already into local economies to support community-led projects? And finally, as I've mentioned in relation to our local spend, we want to diversify our business base and look at more inclusive business models that are more likely to retain wealth in North Ayrshire. The strategy contains a number of examples of where this is already happening in practice and where we look to accelerate that. If I could just highlight a few examples, and I'm happy to pick up more as part of the Q&A. We launched a 2.6 million community investment fund, which provides funding to back community-led projects within a particular locality. And that's already funded things like an environmental education officer for the Three Towns Growers, which is a local community-led organisation that repurposes land to support allotments and food education. We supported a social enterprise on Arran, Woodside Farms, working with Food for Life, working across business development and procurement to look at how we can support this organisation to provide healthy, locally grown fresh fruit and vegetables for our schools in North Ayrshire. I mentioned the Community Wealth Building Commission, and some of the key members of that include the local NHS, Ayrshire and Arran, college, police, fire and rescue, but we've also extended that across the Ayrshire region to include the 3 Ayrshire local authorities. And a key delivery action for that was the launch of a community wealth building anchor charter as part of Challenge Poverty Week, which sets out around 16 pledges that these organisations are committing to. So pledges that will ensure that they embed community wealth building within their organisations, such as enhancing local spend, looking at how they can engage more with the local business base, looking at how they can employ more locally, support fair work within their organisation, and so on. And that's signed by 6 key anchor institutions in the region, as you can see there, but also recently it's been signed by the North Ayrshire Third Sector Interface, the Ayrshire Community Trust. So I think that just shows that the key role that the third sector and social enterprises and businesses at more diverse forms of ownership can play in delivering community wealth building, and we hope others will commit to this, and so we can truly try and create a fairer and more inclusive local and regional economy in Ayrshire. So in terms of next steps, our strategy is very much action oriented, 55 actions that we want to achieve. We're doing that through the recruitment of around 10 new roles that we have in post, and reshaping how we do economic development, making that more place-based, aligning resource to our 6 localities so that resource can look at a more bottom-up approach to economic development, where we're realising the local opportunities and working more closely with colleagues across the council, including in procurement and community development. North Ayrshire, like all parts of Scotland, has been really negatively impacted in economic terms from the coronavirus. So in September, we launched our economic recovery and renewal approach, which sets out a Green New Deal for North Ayrshire. I think as we move forward, we need to be aligning economic development and climate change. And in 2019, we declared a climate emergency as a council. So very much with community wealth building, we want to look at how we use that as a tool to tackle climate change and support an inclusive and green economic recovery. I mentioned the Community Wealth Building Commission, and we've just agreed a work plan of areas of collaborative opportunity that we'll focus on moving forward. To help support us and guide us, we've set up an expert advisory panel, which Neil is on and is chaired by Sarah Dees of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. And we hope to soon have approval for a £3 million Ayrshire Growth Deal Community Wealth Building Funds through the Scottish Government, which will support the delivery of the things that we want to achieve in the region, and also better support our business base to take on the opportunities that community wealth building presents. I'm happy to come on to these lessons more in the question and answer session, but I thought it was helpful just to provide some lessons for other organisations taking this on, and also to support other places in Scotland that are looking at community wealth building. And I have to say, we're very much still at the start of a journey. We're very much learning. We've been really fortunate to have this support of Neil and his team at Clays, who've played an instrumental role in sharing lessons from other places to us. So we very much see ourselves as still on this journey, but I hope the lessons offer some guidance to other places. I think what I would draw out for other places taking on community wealth building is that we have to rethink the way that we traditionally do things. I think it's proven that it doesn't work with the stubborn rates of poverty and inequality, the climate emergency. We need to focus more on places, engaging with our communities and local business base, and all of this takes resource investment, and it takes time, but I think it's clear that new approaches are needed now more than ever. So I'll stop there, but I'm very happy to take questions as part of the Q&A, and I look forward to hearing from the next speakers as well.
Thanks very much, Julie. I can see some of the questions and comments are starting to come in, so we can come to some of those at the end. I guess, picking up, one of the questions that's starting to come in or comments is around how perhaps sometimes smaller organisations or how social enterprise can fit in with this agenda. So I'm really delighted that we're finishing off this session hearing from our speakers, Bridie and Craig, talking about kind of how as local organisations they've come together to look at this agenda in Southwest Edinburgh. So over to you, Bridie and Craig.
Huge thanks, Naomi, and to Social Enterprise Scotland. And we can maybe introduce ourselves first. Over to Craig.
Yeah, I'm Craig Wilson, so I'm General Manager of Big Hearts Community Trust, which is the charity associated with Heart of Midlothian Football Club based in the southwest of Edinburgh.
And I'm Chief Executive at Space and Broomhouse Hub. The Broomhouse Centre has a new name because we do things outside of that community as well, but very much got our feet in that from our new hub was opened about 18 months ago. And the third partner is Whale Arts. Sadly, due to circumstances beyond her control, Leah couldn't be with us today. She's Chief Executive of Whale Arts, and that's an arts-based, but very much a community-based organisation up in Wester Hales. So we're doing it. This is as a conversation between Craig and I, because that's what it's been all the way along. And the conversation started to create the GoBeyond Network just before lockdown last year, when we reached out to each other across Southwest Edinburgh to say, goodness, we could be on our own with this, or we could be a bit stronger if we just stayed in touch. So before it was, we all had to go home. We had one physically distanced meeting, and Craig and Leah came to that. That created the network, and we used Slack as a system to create the network electronically, and we let our local IJB folk know and the City Council know, well, we're here, we don't know quite what will happen. There was a lot of fear, and I still think there is, because of the new variant we have now. There's a lot of fear at the time, so some of it was about not being heroes, just being pals. And just to say, Craig and ourselves have worked together for quite a few years, building a really solid partnership around kinship care, so there's quite a lot of trust in the locality. So over to Craig.
Yeah, and I think, Bridie, we've obviously reflected and spoke about this a few times. I think that our journey towards community wealth building did begin with some really practical steps in terms of being small local organisations that I guess feel like we're in the heart of our communities and know the local people really well. And I think some of the principles that we have kind of adopted stand us in really good stead for hopefully being part of something wider across Edinburgh. But I think for Southwest Edinburgh in particular, and for us, and I'm sure you can add to this, Bridie, some of the things that we have really tried to challenge ourselves on is just being as responsive to local need as possible, and not obviously at our end of the scale. And I think one of the questions kind of touches on this is, how does community wealth building make an impact on, or some of the principles around community wealth building, how does it impact on smaller organisations? And I think for us, what we've been really keen to try and do is be as responsive as possible, be there for local community, and I think, Bridie, more than anything else, is trust in each other and trust in our kind of ability to do the right thing and not ask for permission to do that. So there was huge demands around food, around the early days of the pandemic, and perhaps, Bridie, that's something you can touch on that kind of led us in a more perhaps the direction that we're more in just now.
Yeah, so we coordinated things like standards as to what was needed for safety, which meant we were fairly well organised when the City Council came to us to ask us the network to play a lead role in Southwest Edinburgh for food provision. We were already doing it. Craig's team, the Whale Arts team, and many other even smaller organisations. I suppose we're sort of medium-sized. We're a development trust that's 30 years old. So an overnight success in 30 years. It's taken us to now to get the sort of governance and some of the things that mean we can have the sort of infrastructure we have. So we're a development trust that did an asset transfer and then opened a new hub. We do everything from working with older folk right the way down to young people as as does Craig. But there's also a lot of wee organisations that are not on the radar of public services that we were able to help. So the coordination piece also happened when the Scottish Government wanted to put money into the area. Rather than competing with each other, we were able to present a Southwest GoBeyond approach, a set of applications which coordinated, and it meant that people knew we were talking to each other, and then we were able to get some money, very small amounts of money, hundreds and up to £1,000 out to local organisations really quickly. So that coordination, that networks thing, made us realise when we started looking outwards towards things like community wealth building, actually we could stay organised for the future, because we can all see some of the challenges that are coming around. The possibility, as we just heard, a green recovery. But how are people going to be more organised? How are your key anchors, or as in local anchor organisations, able to be part of that? And I think that's a bit of a sort of good news story. Nonetheless, we were a bit sore because there was some monies in the local authority. Only 3% of this particular budget had come to our whole locality, and some city council folk hadn't really understood why we were saying actually there needs to be an allocation to this community with very high in-work poverty and high child poverty, and we weren't getting our argument through. But interestingly, that's already begun to change. So most recently we're starting to see procurement teams really start to say actually there needs to be an allocation, we need to be spending money locally, and that results in people like Whale, Big Hearts and ourselves. We employ local people. We do the things that are you're hopefully aspiring to in West in the Ayrshires. We look after people well-being. We're managing local assets and land, or looking at a new asset transfer, which Whale is. So that ability to coordinate this year, we hope will be there. So it's an aspiration really for us that we stay networked as we look towards community wealth building, as the Scottish Government start to work with the City Council. But it's nice to impart some good news that actually some of the procurement things are really starting to happen in terms of the opportunities for the locality. I'm going to hand back to Craig in terms of actually some of the things that, because you're really rooted in the community, Craig, aren't you?
Yeah.
And you draw on that culture and connection.
Yeah, and I suppose that's the one thing that is always a question around, football club being at the heart of its kind of working class community, which you see across Scotland. I guess in Hearts' case, almost now majority owned by 8,000 fans, rather than it being one person that owns a football club that's obviously in the heart of somewhere that the most child poverty in Edinburgh and the Gorgie and Sighthill ward. So there's a huge onus on us to make a difference, and obviously as the club's charity we do that. I think one of the things that people on this call will appreciate, we're not going to be the ones that direct the City of Edinburgh Council into community wealth building, but the frustrations around if they're going to do food provision for families that live in Sighthill and Gorgie and Broomhouse, then it makes absolute sense to get to the families that need that they rely on organisations like ourselves and like Bridie's and like others and like some of the other smaller organisations who do that. And I think one of the key things that we've learned over the process and will take forward, and whether this is community wealth building per se, or it's just a step in the right direction for us, I think one of the things that we would say is the genuine pooling of resource and people doing, our organisations doing what we're best placed to do is something I think that hopefully then means that businesses can get involved at the right point, and other organisations can join us on a bit of a journey that will ultimately be good news for the people that live and work in the communities that we're surrounded by. So yeah, I think it's really interesting seeing the comparison between what Neil and what Julie have said, and obviously that bit more of a practical sense from us. And I think Bridie's point, we're not here saying that we are, this is community wealth building, what we are showing. I think what we're saying is that there's definitely elements of our work that are in that direction, and we'd love for conversations to continue between ourselves and obviously the wider kind of anchor organisations, if you like, in the City of Edinburgh, and particularly for us on our doorstep in the southwest of Edinburgh.
And maybe just behind Craig and behind Lee and behind myself, but also an area called Ox Gangs, there are actually really very local little action groups who do some of the conversations with local people. So we know what the priorities are for a long time now. We have street parties, we have events where people tell us what's important. So I can tell you the top 4 things that the community have told me, not my agenda, which are more for young people, more food, more community building, and more to reduce isolation, so there's more communication going on. Interestingly, that's exactly what we needed to do the past 8 months. So the community were pretty wise in terms of the consultations we've done with them. Wales, similarly, Ox Gangs, we've done these. So we're, in a way, people are assets. There are assets on our boards and the organisations that are really tiny and off the radar. But meanwhile, you've got organisations that, if there's going to be some business development opportunities, could actually pitch for some of those service or product contracts that might come. The city region deal, we hadn't really seen a penny of it. We make great sandwiches as a social enterprise, but we hadn't made any sandwiches for anybody in the city region deal. But is there something more productive we could do again? So one of the days I really woke up to this was when Neil and the leader of North Ayrshire talked about business development for local organisations that are starting to be, our turnover is over 1 million now. We're in the Scottish enterprise space of getting some business development. And we've got fantastic other anchors that we could collaborate with rather than compete with. When you do the business development, then you can go for the procurement opportunities down the line. So I suddenly thought, this is really exciting, because you're not going to say, are you ready now? We're going to invest in those organizations. So, but I think the network bit is also important. We're not trying to be heroes. We're actually trying to be advantaging our local tiny groups and advantaging our other partners, such as Whale and Craig. We're not trying to do this on our own. So I think networks that start people talking to understand what community wealth building is locally, whatever your network looks like, is, I would say, get started, start talking about it. It's common language, that it is about investing in your local people and treating them as assets. Back to Craig.
That's probably us, Bridie. We're probably at our time. So
I think we're, I'm not too sure. I don't know whether we need another 2 minutes. If we haven't, back to Naomi.
Thanks, Bridie. My internet froze momentarily then, so I don't know if you were trying to do a handover and I just missed it. I was thinking, oh no. And thankfully it came back just in time, I think. So thank you everyone for all of those presentations. I think I've got a few notes actually that I took as we were going down, because I think some of the conversation I'm starting to see in the chat's really interesting about what community wealth building is and where its focus is. And I think why that's interesting, particularly for this webinar and I guess for social enterprises, the thought that goes through my mind, I think this approach to kind of the local economic development is so critical. I think we've seen that proven particularly in the last 12 months, I think, in terms of that real need for building up the capacity of our organisations to be there when we need them to act locally. I wonder whether some of the confusion around what the role is perhaps for the community sector or the social enterprise sector is that comment Neil was just making about, is almost the term community wealth building misleading to our sector to some degree? Or do you think it's just that to start this process off, it has to start at that kind of bigger level in terms of some of the big hits and the bigger approaches from the local authority first, and over time it will filter down to the smaller organisations? Or do you think that actually we have to kind of almost remind ourselves that the community in this context means something slightly different? And I'll perhaps ask that of Neil, just to kind of come in on that kind of tree and bee analogy a little bit more, because I thought that was really interesting.
It's a really good question, and I think there has been a little bit of misinterpretation. Community wealth building is an American phrase. Initially, we called it local wealth building on the community. So it's not equal to community development. It's not the same as community empowerment. It's economics. It's community economics more. Yeah. So it's important that it's done. It's not about service delivery. It's not about empowerment. It's links to that, but it's mostly about economics and making sure the economy is brought back home. That's where the community comes in. Oikonomos is the Greek word for economy, and it means keeper of the household, bringing the economy back home. And that implicit in that, of course, the economy is not in our home. It's not in our communities. It doesn't serve us. There's somebody somewhere making a buck that's nothing to do with our community. We need to limit that extent. So that's a key point here. And I think there is a little bit of terminology. People like, oh, community development, isn't it? Community power. It's not, it's relate, but it's a different thing. And the trees and the bees thing's important. This is about big economic change. It's about the big levers we can pull, the big public spending levers, the big land and property levers, the big wealth extraction stuff to stop. It's the big economic. This is trying to mainstream, hot wire this sort of thinking into the capitalist economy, the neoliberal economy. right? It's disrupting something quite big there. So it's about the trees, about the big things. But for that to work, we need the bees, we need all of us, we need everybody doing a little bit, all adding up. Mony a mickle makes a muckle, man. You know, many a small thing makes a lot, and we've got that activist energy as well as we are recipients of how wealth needs to land. So hope that helps, Naomi.
No, it does, because I do think it's a term that sometimes, like you say, I think because we're so used to the word community in our sector, you kind of, you use the language in your own way first. So that's why I wanted to perhaps come back to it a little bit. And I think it's perhaps picking up just on, and I'll move on to questions for others in a minute. Neil, don't worry, you'll be off the hot seat. It's just one thought that goes through my mind, and I think we've seen in the last 12 months, people are, I guess, by their very nature, having to do things like shop more locally. So the role of the individual in this kind of programme. And I wonder, do you think there's scope for more of those kind of, we've seen, I don't know, the Preston model had it, but I used to live in Bristol many years ago, and we've had things like the Bristol Pound for many years, where people kind of had incentives to shop locally, and you almost used an equivalent of local money to try and encourage local shops. Do you think we need something like that to kind of engage the public more, or do you think that's bringing it down to that too small a level again?
I think that, you know, local currencies and all that sort of the way that we relate to each other through our exchange systems, trading systems, economy is really important, and they're useful vehicles. What you touched upon is a really important point, Naomi, and it's something I've been got a bit of thought to really in terms of what this pandemic means. And I think in some sense it's done us a favour, because one of the few favours maybe, in that it's actually made us realise, right, that local matters because we're localised. You know, it's a bloody pain in the ass stuck in your back bedroom. But nevertheless, there is an end, and there's a positive to that. Yeah. It's also made us think about the provenance of our goods and services and the febrile nature. Look at PPE, the febrile nature of supply chains. And also, when we buy coffee, you know what, even a simple cup of coffee, where's that come from? What's the health and safety around that? Is that person getting paid the living wage? Yeah. And where does the money I give, does it go to Seattle? Is it stayed in South Edinburgh? We're becoming more discerning as consumers because of this pandemic, localizing, but also the provenance of things. We're starting to relate more to what we consume and what the impacts of that consumption is. It used to be people like me living in South Manchester, middle classes, you know, do the right hipster boho thing with my purchasing. I can afford it. I think that's starting to, people that can't afford it are starting to think about the provenance of goods and services and how they relate to it. And that's a powerful force, because that actually counteracts that wealth extraction and that hypermobility of global capital, which frankly screws too many of our lives.
No, I mean, it's fascinating. I stay in a small town. It's been really interesting. I've got to be honest, the shops that have adapted most quickly to local food deliveries, to helping people that were isolated, they're our local businesses, and they're not necessarily always social enterprises. So they're small businesses, but they're all very rooted in local community, and that's I guess the key thing in terms of doing that. So perhaps, Julie, I am going to pick on the point that, you know, always comes up when community wealth building comes up in our sector. So you can probably imagine the word that's coming next, because it's always around procurement. But I wanted to take perhaps a different view, because I think we're always kind of, you know, where are the procurement opportunities for our sector? And I always sit here and think, well, we have to understand kind of risk perspectives and how all of that balances out. But procurement's always a big issue, I think, for our sector in terms of, our contracts too big? How do they get in? And therefore contracts end up going outside our community, I guess, in terms of providers. So what are the tips you would give our sector if we were trying to get in on those supply chains and in on those procurements, rather than me always saying, you need to do more about procurement? What do we need to do as a sector?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, Naomi. I knew as soon as you started talking there that the P word was coming, and it comes up all the time. And I see a question in the chat as well around what about procurement regulations? And when we started talking about this, I have to say, you know, procurement colleagues were a wee bit terrified when we brought Neil down into Cunningham House, our head office, and started talking about how we enhance our local spend, because there are regulations, and as local authorities, we're not going to break the rules. But you can think about how you use procurement as a tool for economic development. You can think about what the nuances are as well. For example, there's nothing to stop our business development team working more with local businesses to enhance their capacity to be able to bid for contracts, not just with the council, but with other organisations, with organisations outside the region as well. So when I mentioned there about new resource and that more place-based approach, we've changed the way that we do business development. So it's now focused on community wealth building. It's now focused on not just private sector businesses, but a range of models, and it's aligned to the pillars of community wealth building. So I think supplier development is a huge opportunity. I think that has to be done within places, because we need to realise the assets that are in places. We need to realise the organisations that are already there. We need to realise where there are gaps in our local spend. Where could we work with local social enterprises? Where could we bring people together into a consortium or a collaborative model to provide that service or provide those goods? So I think there's huge opportunity. I think what I would say to local social enterprises, there's another question around how will the council support them as well. I think you need to engage with these programmes, go chatting down the door of your local authority or Scottish Enterprise or whoever it is in your area that provides business support, and ask for that support around supplier development. Get an awareness of the contracts that are coming up. What are the creative solutions that you can put in place? Because the sector will have some of the solutions, not the public sector body that has those contracts up. So I think that's huge. I do think as well, collaboration between smaller organisations to provide goods and services, as Bridie and Craig have illustrated so well this afternoon, is a real opportunity too. And the local authority won't deliver all of community wealth building, but we can support organisations, a range of organisations, to maximise the opportunities in that place.
Thank you, Julie. I know Bridie just messaged me saying she's keen to give a bit of a sense of her experience on procurement, but I've got one more question, and it's perhaps following on, again, you'll probably guess where I sit on this, as I say that I don't see there's many advantages that have come out of Brexit, but is one of the advantages that's come out of it that actually we have a bit more freedom around our procurement rules?
The P word and the B word today, Naomi.
All coming in.
Yeah, they're all coming in. Well, I think it's still to be determined what those rules will be moving forward. But I do think that, and who knows when we'll get that clarity on things like state aid, etc. But I do feel that within our current rules, there is so much we can do. We can work in different ways. And we need to stop seeing procurement as a tick box exercise. It's about regulation. We need to see it as a tool for economic development. One example of something we're doing within the current regulations is looking at our quick quotes. Instead of a service just picking the people that they always pick for to go on the list of quick quote, we're looking at pass that to our business development team. They have the intelligence of the local capacity in the area. They can identify additional organisations who might be able to provide that service and feed that back to procurement. So it's just, I think, as I mentioned in one of the 5 lessons, it's about challenging the way that we do things and thinking outside of the box, because it is clear that that approach isn't working. So I think, you know, it remains to be seen what will happen in terms of the rules moving forward. But I think within what we already have, we could be doing so much more.
No, thanks, Julie. We actually had a session last week talking about procurement, particularly for our sector, and quick quotes came up. So if you missed that webinar last week, the recording's up, and I'd encourage you to look at it. But in essence, if something's coming up and it's got a value for less than 50,000, I think it is, it can go through the quick quote system. And there is a real opportunity, I think, there. And organisations like P4P in our sector can help talk you through all of that. So if you want to know more on that, listen to last week's webinar recording. I'm going to just bring Bridie in just in terms of just saying what a bit of your experience is, and then I've got one more P word I'm bringing in which is a bit of promotion for something we're doing. So don't worry, you don't have to guess what it is. Bridie, your experience on procurement, you wanted to just bring in.
Well, it's just really wonderful to hear what Julie's just said, but I just want to give an example because somebody mentioned rural communities, and I worked on a piece of work which was economic development chaired a piece of work around spending leader monies and managing that budget over a few years. But equally, there was some community planning monies around young people. And what they realised was the procurement team could redesign the way the monies went. So rather than it just being one big block contract that went out of the area that likely one big national charity got, but meanwhile, the young people couldn't get from Mouth to Galashiels. That's quite a few buses in the long distance. The money went locally and they designed the programme that way. So it meant local organisations were more able to be part of it. But I think the important about the big economic levers is so interesting because the young person who got the piece of work on it was a sort of winter programme and they worked on a boat and they went on to get an apprenticeship as a result of the work that the procurement people did, went to work for a company, Collins, who this week, sadly, we've seen at Westminster, the Brexit word, fantastic local employer provide opportunities for young people to do apprenticeships. So yeah, we need the big anchors, we need our businesses, we need our social enterprises, yes, to be maybe feeding in that, so the procurement isn't naive about where it can spend a proportion of its money in that, and then you get the ones that are really hard to reach. In Southwest Edinburgh, in our case, that's parents who are Napier's 10 minutes walk away, but it's a million miles away in your head if you've been through a great deal and you haven't got the skills. If we can help them get there, then they can get the jobs and they can get the training. So it's that sort of connectivity I think is really interesting in terms of from the community to the big anchors.
Thank you, Bridie. Gosh, I'm struggling. I've got 12 minutes left and there's loads of questions coming through. So I'm going to do my little plug for my P word just because I can before everyone signs off for the webinar. And it's just that tomorrow we've actually got a places event that we're running. So we've been encouraging organisations or social enterprise hotspot areas to come forward to really try and push placemaking agendas for social enterprise. So we know there's lots of other examples all over Scotland, but if you want to come to that, I'm just going to share the link in the chat. So that's my little plug for tomorrow because I'd be daft not to. And then I'll come back to the questions. It's a really interesting one I can see here from David about that thing about looking at social enterprise is a great business model. We obviously at Social Enterprise Scotland are here to promote it and create opportunities. Are our expectations of our sector realistic? And I guess it's interesting to me as well that thing of like there's a question in about scaling and does it need higher profile and how do we balance that scaling up with the local connection? And I'm perhaps just going to ask Bridie and Craig just to give us a perspective on that. Do we put too much pressure on local organisations to always scale up?
Over to Craig.
Yeah. I think it's a challenge to find I think sometimes one of the things that we all face, and this would be probably across the board to an extent, is what your genuine expertise is and what you can actually bring to something. And I think that's the bit that there will be brilliant examples of businesses and social enterprises and charities who have got something really strong, works really well in a neighbourhood, in a local community. There is always going to be a challenge of if you're trying to do something else beyond that and trying to stretch it. And I think that's something that probably for us as an organisation, I don't know about Bridie's feeling, is we've never came out and almost said we are absolutely focused on one part of the city, which is the one that's on our doorstep. However, it makes logical sense for us to focus there first and to make sure that the people in that community recognise us and know us and can benefit from it, rather than us seeing ourselves as needing to become this thing that suddenly needs to have a presence in all the different localities across Edinburgh. Despite the fact, I guess, for someone in my position, the football club that we're connected with, and obviously we operate from their stadium, has got fans based, that now the nature of it is that supporters of our charity come, are across Edinburgh, the Lothians, Fife. That's just the nature of it. However, we've resisted that temptation to become something that's trying to serve that much wider area, and I think having less impact. And I think that's not an easy. I think that's a difficult thing to manage sometimes. Is that where you absolutely fit and where you should put your priority.
No, thank you, Craig. I hadn't brought you in much, but I think it's really interesting. I know when certainly the local authorities and the talks I've heard on community wealth building, often the local football clubs really are seen as one of those things, an anchor organisation being that sense of someone that's not moving from their area. And I think, you know, it goes back to some of your earlier points about that kind of sense that the football club brings so many people that might not be having these conversations and debates, but absolutely need community wealth building in their areas, in terms of jobs, in terms of employment, in terms of living wage, perhaps. You know, it's critical to that environment. So I think the linking with the football clubs actually is critical in my mind to the kind of community wealth building approach in terms of the anchor organisations. I'm just reading through some of the questions, and someone was just saying if you can't see all the questions, they're coming on the Q&A and chat. So some get put in the kind of questions to everyone, and some just come in direct. So if you've got any, just post them in, and I'll just do a quick flick through. I don't know whether there's any reactions from any of our panel. Just you'll have seen some of the questions, and I know people are typing. But Neil, could you perhaps say a little bit? Someone was asking about the Highlands and what's happening. So we've heard a lot of focus on North Ayrshire. Is there a kind of forum where people can find out a bit more about what's happening in the other areas, or kind of look for those connections?
I think in the SCRIG, the Scottish Centre for Regional Inclusive Growth, has emerging stuff on it, and I know there's case studies in that sort of emerging, not just in the pilot areas, but other areas that are doing stuff around community wealth building and organisations doing stuff. The Western Isles is a fully fledged sort of area that's doing the whole thing, as in North Ayrshire sort of way. But I know that Moray Council are doing stuff on their own back, though. And Highlands and Islands, we've had extensive conversation with them and their interest and agenda. So I think we're in early days in terms of the learning, I suppose, in some of this, but how it will spill over into policy and future activity. I think we're on a journey with this. Just one point very quickly, and it's a challenge. I want to get it in just in case you don't get another chance, but it's a challenge for the sector really. And is that I think we need to start to dislodge and disrupt ideas that, you know, what we talk about is social enterprise. It's the fluffy stuff. It's the stuff that kind of sits alongside the main thing that happens. And I do think we get into social enterprise, co-ops, inclusive ownership models that relates to communities, whatever you call it. I think it doesn't matter. We want an economy that is social, yeah, not a social economy, an economy that is social. And I think that is a institutional problem for some of you. You know, social enterprise, you've got to look after yourselves, yeah, but also almost in the way you view the world, a consciousness thing. You know, that you see yourself as like, well, we're not that. You know, we are. We should be trying to build in Scotland a social, an economy, a whole thing that's social, and that's a challenge for the whole sector, I think, and for economic mainstream. But economic mainstream will change if they hear that more and more from you lot, opposed to thinking we just want our own little bit that's carving out a little niche, and then the big economy can keep chucking on.
No, it's interesting. I think we're all perhaps guilty of seeing things through our own blinkers at times. And I know a lot of the conversation and even challenge I've put down to our sector at times is, you know, I think social enterprise is a real answer to lots of situations, but it's not going to be the only one. You know, at the end of the day, unless we really disrupt all of our economic systems, we're probably all shareholders as a consequence of having a pension plan. So let's actually look at things in that much broader sense. You know, we're all council taxpayers. So yes, we're all wanting to get contracts, but we're not wanting them to put our council tax money that we pay at risk, but we want them to give us contracts, and we're wanting to have a particular business model, but also have a pension. It's like, unless the whole system completely disrupts, we've got to recognise that we all play and all wear different hats at different times, which is why I think the partnership approach is critical for me in terms of everything that we bring together and really trying to understand different people's perspectives. It's very easy for us to sit here and go, oh, the local authority needs to give us contracts and procurement. Actually, we need to prepare our organisations to manage risk, to have the skills and to do all of that as well, and to get the balance. So I think that the questions that we're seeing coming in about business development and what Bridie was talking about getting that business development in to help them in terms of going for contracts as well, is let's take that support and let's build our own knowledge as well. And I guess always not just fighting our own corner, but fighting for the community. And that's what's really interesting to me about the wealth building agenda. It should be about fighting for our local communities, not the very particular niche roles that we all play in them. But maybe that's me being a bit preachy, but I think it's a fascinating agenda to me. I'm just flicking through the questions. Yeah, so some stuff coming up with links for P4P. If anyone wants any of those links, we can send them. So that's the procurement support and advice. Just perhaps, Julie, just in terms of a few things are coming in about how do we get the balance of the top down and that bottom up kind of approach. So I kind of get, and I suppose this is me wearing my taxpayer, I get why you start with the big organisations and try to filter things down. How do we make sure that we're also trying to kind of, I look at things like entrepreneurship, I look at skills in our local economy. How do we get that balance at the same time?
Yeah, it's a good question. I saw the question coming in. It comes back to Neil's trees and bees analogy that he articulated so well. But I'm speaking in a certain way about this because I work for a local authority. So I'm in a major anchor institution, but it's about getting that. It's absolutely back to what Neil said. It's about using those levers that we already have, but we can redirect more spend locally unless we have the local, a vibrant local business base there. So we have to put that support in place to enable that to happen. And when I say businesses, I'm not being exclusive. I'm not meaning private sector SMEs. I'm meaning any kind of inclusive business model, including local businesses, cooperatives, and social enterprises. So I don't think we can differentiate against different types. But yeah, I think that's why we've invested so much in more resource and redesigning our services to enable some of this activity. Because in North Ayrshire, we're never going to have 100% local spend. We're never going to have that. That's not a realistic scenario. But we can enhance our local spend at the same time as better supporting local businesses and supporting them, building their capacity as well. So I definitely do think there are two sides. I also think as well that we need to have, when we developed our strategy, it wasn't just the council saying what the priorities are. We spoke to local areas, we understood the needs of local places and communities as well. So there has to be a combination of realising the powers that we have as big anchor institutions, but realising the need to build capacity locally, and also the power of local community anchor organisations such as development trusts, social enterprises and so on.
No, thank you, Julie. I mean, it's interesting. I stay down in Dumfries and Galloway, and I think, it's always interesting to me that we don't have lots of big companies here. So, I wonder how much always goes out of our local economy here, but the consequence of it always going out is it never gets developed. And I think it's, is it the chicken or egg? How do we get those two things kind of coming together?
And I think that's why, Naomi, we have to understand where our spend is going. So that's a key first step. We have to understand these big anchor organisations or these regions, places, we have to understand where our spend is going. And that will identify the opportunities where there are gaps in the market that someone could step into, or where there are opportunities to direct more of that locally. And then we can look at the things like supplier development, working with partners like P4P who have been praised in the chat, and rightly so. The council, we work closely with them to develop the capacity of the sector.
Thank you, Julie. I'm perhaps going to come in with my last question I'm conscious it's 12:30. Just my last question to Craig and Bridie, really, because I think obviously collaboration seems to be a key thing, certainly for social enterprise sector, in terms of developing partnerships and relationships. If you were to share your top tip on collaboration, what did you really learn through collaboration, and what was the challenge in it, and perhaps leave that as a kind of an action point that people from our sector can think about in terms of how they look at building collaboration locally?
Over to Craig first.
Yeah, I would just say first that for me, the biggest thing, and perhaps the pandemic has to an extent made this more possible, and then on another hand, it's made some of it a bit more complicated, is creating time and space to do that. So one of the things that I think that we've really benefited from, certainly the early days of the pandemic, was that, almost, 3 or 4 mornings out of 5, I was catching up with Bridie and with Leah and with others from across the network to talk about the demands that were entirely different that week to what they might have been the previous week. And I think the biggest thing about us collectively then being able to share, listen, sometimes really straightforward challenges with one another, was that we were able to take confidence from what each of us was trying to do or how we were doing it together. And I think potentially coming back to that point about not asking for permission to do some of the things we knew we were best placed to do, we were just going to go and do it. And I think that is because of the collective and the trust that you build up really quickly in terms of us creating space and time to do that. I think one of the things that we're reflecting on the other day is me, Leah and Bridie, 3 mornings out of 5, we were catching up. I've actually never met Leah face to face, which sounds ridiculous in terms of the situation you find yourself in, but it just shows how quickly those partnerships have developed and how quickly that trust has been made even bigger.
Yeah.
No, thank you, Craig. And Bridie?
Oh, I think I completely endorse everything you just said, because it's about trust, absolutely. But I think keep talking to you, create networks, and maybe go into consortia. Those are the sorts of things that become possible, and you can start to get, we went into a consortium for some services for care work, young carers, big investment in the city, 8 years of investment, millions of pounds. A citywide consortium, a different one to this one, have won the bid with the support of P4P. We couldn't have done it if it hadn't been the turnover as well, because of all the rules. So I think get the networks working, because then you can be ready in consortia, whether that's a bigger, the whole of a local authority, or right the way through to micro areas. Then you're ready when people come and talk to you about it.
Thank you so much, Bridie. I just finished, I wrote down 3 words as people were starting to talk at the start of this webinar. I wrote down the word trust. So we need to start building trust more. How do we do that? And between organisations in our sector and with local authorities, other places, with the private sector in our area, this is about working together with a variety of organisations. I wrote down the word risk. So is there something we need to do about redefining how we look at risk, how we define it and what that means, was one of the other words I wrote down. I wrote down partnership. So I wrote down those 3 kind of words as I was listening to the chat, and I thought it's interesting that you reflected on some of those. So thank you. I already know there's comments coming in. People have really enjoyed and got a lot, I think, from today's session. There's lots of questions I haven't got round to. I know we'll come back to this theme. We'll be touching on places at our event tomorrow. We've got Aileen Campbell, Cabinet Secretary, joining us tomorrow, where we're actually doing a launch of 3 social enterprise places across Scotland. We know there'll be more, because we know there are more. South West Edinburgh is a great example again. So if you want to join us for that, we've put the link in. And thank you to all of our speakers. It's been a great session today. Really, really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks for the invite. Nice meeting you, Craig and Naomi. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bless you.